Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. A new study says home prices could fall in 300 cities, and a major driver is illegal immigrants going home and letting young Americans finally move out of mom's basement. A recent, quote, bombshell forecast from Zillow predicts 1 in 3 American housing markets will decline over the next year, with the hardest hit in the Sun Belt, where prices have been soaring since COVID and Biden inflation. Now, this is a big change from COVID, where houses were boomer slot machines, and what's driving it is a historic imbalance between buyers and sellers. There's currently roughly 500,000 more home sellers than people trying to buy a house. In fact, there's currently 46% more sellers than buyers, up by half from last year. What's driving that is the fact that millions of Americans have been locked in their homes for years now by pandemic-era 3% mortgages. The problem being, now that mortgages are 6.5% to 7%, they cannot afford to sell. Even a horizontal move into the same type of house would double their mortgage. That's frozen sellers in carbonite for going on a decade now, meaning a massive backlog of lifestyle changes. Kids moved out, kids were born. That would have meant a house sale in a functioning market, but instead backed up like a golf ball in a snake. So that's now bursting, but buyers are still strangled by the 1-2 punch of those 6.5 mortgages and the 27% jump in home prices during COVID. So houses are expensive, mortgages are expensive, and sellers have spent years stuck in the wrong house. A perfect storm that is running home sales 20% below the 30-year average. And the storm is hitting hardest in those Sunbelt states, since being run by Republicans, you can actually build houses without having to sacrifice a goat to the zoning board. Last week, I talked about how the housing crisis in America is entirely a blue state thing. In red states, houses are being built. In blue states, they are not, despite a hemorrhage of population to red states. Combine all that with the seller overhang, and it's places like Tampa and Austin that are getting hardest hit by Zillow's price declines. Finally, illegal immigrants. A new working paper from the Dallas Fed estimates illegals drove fully 30% of the house price growth during COVID, so about $40,000 for the median house. Now that the illegals are going home, well, at least 3 million of them, that's now reversing in the most migrant-heavy cities, statistically to the tune of 15,000 to 20,000 for the median home. So it's next. Falling home prices is great news for renters who've been treading water to the point the average renter has just $5,000 in net worth, compared to several $100,000 for homeowners. And it's great news for young Americans who've been priced out to the point they are living with mom at Great Depression levels, and fully 2/3 of 30-year-olds are stuck renting. For boomers, it was just half. Of course, all this is at the expense of those boomers for whom fully 1/3 of their retirement savings is home equity, averaging roughly $250,000 at age 65. Still, to normalize housing prices and get the housing market functioning again, prices are either going to have to fall a lot more, or wages are going to have to rise to grow into them. Both are happening, but there's miles to go when minimum salary to qualify for the median home is currently $120,000, while median salary in the country is just half that. Europe is throwing away its industrial base, with Volkswagen announcing 100,000 layoffs on top of the 50,000 it's already cut. Now, the rule of thumb in car manufacturing is multiplied by 5 for supplier jobs, so that's 500,000 jobs. Now multiplied by population, and in U.S. terms, it is equivalent to 2 million manufacturing jobs. Europe is well on its way to becoming an open-air museum for Chinese and American tourists. Last week, dying German car maker Volkswagen, which also owns Audi, Porsche, Bentley, and Lamborghini, announced it's laying off 15% of its workforce after profits plunged by 3/4 to the point Volkswagen is making 3 pennies on the dollar, which is interesting because that's below their cost of capital, as in Volkswagen's main business is lighting money on fire. This will drag their shares down 75% since pre-COVID, almost 90% since their peak. The CEO is blaming Trump's tariffs, which gobbled up 1/3 of profits, Chinese competition, which gobbled up their sweetheart margins in China, And above all, Europe's brutal production climate with energy prices and taxes twice U.S. rates, and an empire of red tape that, going by compliance hours, is up to 3 times more than the already crippling regulation in the U.S. In short, it is almost impossible to build anything in Europe. Even when you've already got the factory, you would be crazy to build a new factory in Europe. The problem is it's much bigger than Volkswagen. Every major German car maker and most of the rest of its industrial base, so chemicals, steel, pharma, are slashing capacity and moving jobs. Parts maker Bosch already announced 22,000 cuts. ZF and Continental threw in another 20. Krupp Steel is down 11. Delivery company DHL is laying off 8,000. Bayer, 13.5. Put it together, and Germany's lost 638,000 manufacturing jobs since COVID, now running over 127,000 a year, which is 500,000 in U.S. population terms. Worse, it's only the beginning because a bevy of major German manufacturers are setting up bases in America, a landing pad for future jobs. Mercedes and BMW announced $9 billion in South Carolina and Alabama. Rule of thumb is $1 million per job, so that's 9,000 manufacturing jobs. Power giant RWE and pharma giant Boehringer are each pitching another $20 billion. Siemens, Bayer, Merck are all plowing billions into American production. So you've got at least 50,000 jobs already in the pipeline, and it is accelerating. So as sex, if Japan is what not to do on debt, Europe is what not to do on growth. In the past 20 years, Germany's grown half the rate of the U.S. In fact, it's been in technical recession 3 out of the past 7 years. Take-home pay in Germany, formerly the jewel of Europe, is now a fifth below the state of West Virginia. So how to fix it? Economically, it's simple: slash red tape, slash taxes and spending, slash the bureaucracy that currently employs 1 in 3 Germans, and build, baby, build some coal plants and nukes. Alas, politically, it is impossible because Germany is trapped in a grand coalition of left and right in order to shut out the anti-immigrant AfD, the so-called cordon sanitaire, basically a government run by Bernie Sanders and Mitt Romney. That means even though the current leader is conservative on paper, he cannot pass the reforms it would take to pull Germany out of its death spiral, all while Donald Trump gleefully poaches Europe's crown jewels to Alabama. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold, paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/Prof. St. Ange. That's COINKITE.com/Prof. St. Ange. Okay, back to our show. Democratic Socialists are taking over the Democrat Party, throwing their remaining base under the bus after the party already threw out blue collars. Last week, Democratic Socialists swept all 4 Democrat primaries for congressional seats in New York, toss in another 2 formal Democrat Socialists, according to prediction market Kalshi, plus a dozen fellow travelers like AOC and Rashid Tlaib, and Dems could be looking at close to 20 communists in Congress. Now, 20 is not a big number in a Democrat caucus of 200-ish seats, but sweeping the board is a big deal in politics. It's already got the blue poobahs in a panic. So first, what is a Democrat Socialist? Marketing aside, it's a communist. The official platform wants public ownership of corporations to seize the means of production. They want to, quote, abolish the carceral state, which means no police, no prisons, of course, no guns for self-defense, so we are sheep to the slaughter. They want higher taxes, more job-gutting regulations, a packed Supreme Court which effectively abolishes the Constitution, Medicare for all so you can wait a year for surgery like Canadians, the Green New Deal to return us to medieval water wheels, no air conditioning or dialysis machines for you sinful carbon footprint you. And they want to abolish ICE so billions can mass migrate to America, go on welfare, vote for the same socialism that built whatever third world paradise they came from. Now, what's interesting about all this is as deeply unpopular among the traditional base of the Democrat Party, meaning blue collars, union guys, blacks, and Hispanics. In the 4 elections last week, the Democrat Socialists did terrible among minorities, especially blacks, who are even more tough on crime and even more pro-job than whites. When Pew Analysis found blacks are pro-job and tough on crime by 9-1, for Hispanics, it's 5-1. So how did Democrat Socialists win the Big Apple, which is 70% minority, by hoovering up New York's educated whites? One study found a 40-point swing. The more college degrees and the whiter the district. Now, considering liberal whites vote like flies, they swamped the other 70. This is all fascinating because it implies the Democratic Party is going through a MAGA-style metamorphosis, but trading from a big base into a small base. So the Republicans tossed their dead-end country clubbers for the green pastures of middle-class and blue-collar Reagan Democrats, but Dems are ditching those lush pastures for dead-end pronouners, trannies, and guys who say Latinx. Now, to be fair, Dems did double down on race talk to try and scare blacks and Latinos, but they put their heart and soul into the activists, the stuff that excites professional activists, left-wing professors, and pretty much nobody else. This faculty-first strategy has almost completely lost the blue collars, who are now Trump's base, and even the minorities are jumping ship. So Trump ran even in 2024 among Hispanics, and he tripled the Republican share of the black vote. In short, Republicans traded up, and Democrats are trading down. So as next, it is too early to write obituaries for the Democrat Party, considering it controls education, media, corporations, rainbow flags and all, and blue city vote stuffers who can swing a bevy of purple states. But when Democrats are putting up ideologues that 1 in 10 Americans support, the party's days are numbered. Social Security is going bust with the so-called trust fund running out in just 6 years. Never-Trumper Rhino Bill Cassidy has a solution. He wants to turn the federal government into a mega venture capital fund run by 535 lobbyist-bought retards in Congress. What could go wrong? After Congress pissed away 91 years of Social Security surpluses, lovingly replaced with IOUs known as Treasury bonds, even the IOUs are about to run out, with the Congressional Budget Office projecting $9 trillion of deficits coming for us, which would imply a 20% cut to Social Security benefits. A new bipartisan plan, well, a Rhino and a couple Dems, would fix this by borrowing another $1.5 trillion for the federal government to invest in the stock market. Well, actually in individual companies. Now, the grain of sanity here is that stocks have historically done about 7% after inflation. They've actually done closer to 12 in the past decade, thanks to the Fed pumping investments at the expense of inflation for the plebs. Meanwhile, the IOUs that make up Social Security's trust fund have returned just 1.7% after inflation since 1957. The difference between 1.7 and 12 is your money doubles every 7 years, compound across a career, and your Social Security check would be 9 times bigger. The average check would be $18,000 per month if it had been invested like a 401k instead of siphoned off by Congress and replaced with IOUs. So Cassidy wants that 12%. Of course, the kicker is it's not 12% when the morons in Congress are running the fund on behalf of donors, activists, and NGOs. In fact, studies have found government management reduces returns 5-fold, to the point you're still playing the casino, but the returns are crawling. The reason being government is corrupt and hands money to donors and political pet projects like mega solar, which has lost billions, synthetic biofuels, which has lost billions, Boeing and Lockheed's money holes, ethanol, 100 billion trains to nowhere. In other words, hand $1.5 trillion to Congress and you won't get 12%. You'll be lucky to get anything. Happily, there is a solution. It's not even exotic. It's called a 401k. Unlike Social Security and unlike Cassidy's dumb plan, you keep the money and you keep the gains. In fact, 401ks have been a spectacular success, racking up over $10 trillion in retirement savings since 1984, while Social Security careened into bankruptcy. So instead of borrowing another $1.5 trillion for Congress to waste and fraud, simply allow Americans to invest their own Social Security payments, just like a 401k. In fact, if Americans had been doing that since the 401k started, they'd currently have another $20 trillion instead of a bankrupt system. That sounds goofy. Consider Singapore, whose Social Security system does run like a 401k. You keep the money in the returns. The system now has over $500 billion of assets controlling for population. That is almost precisely $20 trillion. So as experts, turning Social Security into a 401k could add enough that the average Social Security check would be many times larger. Instead, the Uniparty wants to use Social Security bankruptcy as a human shield to buy a $1.5 trillion slush fund. Personal accounts like 401ks make you an owner. A Congress-run slush fund puts you on a plane flown by 535 people who don't know how to fly. A word from our sponsor. Stocks and even gold are all over the place. If you're ready to diversify, Abundant Minds makes Bitcoin mining simple, transparent, and human. You can deduct every penny thanks to Trump's big beautiful bill. It's a 401k for Bitcoin mining. Founded by husband-wife team Bo and Christine Marie Turner after losing $500,000 to broken promises in the mining industry, Abundant Minds was built to protect investors. You own the machines, and they make it turnkey with hosting in their facilities in Oregon. Pricing is clear with one flat monthly fee and no surprises, and they guarantee uptime so you keep earning day in, day out. If you want easy diversification without pressure, learn more at abundantminds.com/Peter to get some of your first Bitcoin mine for free as a gift to my audience. The biggest risk in Bitcoin isn't volatility, it is custody. Because Bitcoin removes the safety net, there is no bank to call, no reset button if something goes wrong. The reality is, most people are not properly set up. They hold Bitcoin but rely on exchanges, incomplete wallet setups, and have no real plan for privacy or inheritance. This is exactly what the Bitcoin way solves. They help you move from exposure to actual ownership, self-custody done right, privacy, inheritance, even running your own node, all set up with you step by step. They never touch your Bitcoin. They're your support team. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Peter to book a free call and go from where you are today to a much stronger setup. Now back to our show. The Supreme Court just gutted one of the load-bearing walls of the deep state, voting 6-3 to let Trump fire thousands of independent bureaucrats who are the spine of the deep state. Could we see the day when voters actually control the government that rules them? Last week, the Supreme Court decided the long-anticipated Trump v. Slaughter case, which revisits a 90-year precedent called Humphrey's Executor that insulated independent agencies from dismissal by the president. Now, this matters because independent agencies control some of the most important policy levers in the federal government, including the FTC that was at issue in Slaughter, which can block corporate mergers, the SEC, CFTC, and FDIC, which control financial markets and banking insurance, the FCC, who controls free speech, FEC for elections, NLRB for unions, FERC for energy markets, EEOC for affirmative action, and USITC that controls much of trade policy. It's pretty close to the whole shebang. That's a substantial part of the federal government, all outside the control of the president, meaning outside the control of voters, whose only influence is the president and Congress they elect. But with the filibuster paralyzing Congress, that boils down to only the president. So Slaughter puts the ball back in voters' hands. The background here is socialist progressives waged a century-long jihad to take the government away from voters and turn it into a self-licking ice cream cone that serves the progressive revolution. The landmark moment was the 1883 Pendleton Act that established an independent bureaucracy insulated from political control, hence voter control. The excuse was to fight corruption, which of course is as alive as ever, but the result was voters became spectators while federal workers became an occupying army. The deep state was born. It consolidated into so-called independent boards, starting with the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887 that unconstitutionally regulated business, Then it took off an FDR socialist New Deal with dozens of agencies created to rule the country without voters. By 1946, this occupying army won the right to effectively write law in the Administration Procedure Act, then wrangled itself near immunity from being fired in the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, bringing us to today where almost 90% of laws are written by bureaucrats, not by Congress. Until last week, there's nothing you could do about it. Slaughter now joins a parade of recent decisions turning the tide, including Sala, Collins, and Loper-Bright, which give the presidents more control over bureaucrats while giving Congress a bigger role in actually writing the laws that, according to the Constitution, they alone are supposed to write. But there is still miles to go. On the very same day, the court stayed Trump's firing of Fed member Lisa Cook, allegedly on a technicality, but possibly revealing a reluctance to let elected presidents control the unconstitutional Federal Reserve that all but controls the economy. Meanwhile, while Loper and now Slaughter dramatically reshuffle the cards, federal rulemaking, court deference, and federal worker protections remain stubborn and will need multiple decisions to root out. So as experts, in the near term, Trump can purge independent agencies so they stop sabotaging his agenda. Meanwhile, agencies like FTC and SEC are likely to pull back on planned regulatory pushes to keep their heads down. But zooming out, we could see major reductions in the regulatory tax on the economy that studies imply could double or quadruple wages to the point Starbucks and dog walkers would be making six figures. And assuming the Lisa Cook firing is refiled with the technicalities fixed, we could even see a Federal Reserve that actually answers to the people it abuses. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.